What if finding $1 trillion in your backyard wasn't a blessing, but a curse? What if that discovery was the one thing that guaranteed your children would be poorer than you? That your industries would rust, your farms would go barren, and your society would collapse into chaos? This isn't a riddle. It's a pattern. A historical loop so predictable, economists gave it a name: the paradox of plenty, or the resource curse. It's an economic disease that has destroyed nation after nation, not through war or invasion, but through the one thing every country dreams of: unimaginable, sudden wealth. And it happens the exact same way every single time. There are 7 stages. Stage 1, a massive discovery of a valuable resource: oil, gas, minerals. Stage 2, a sudden flood of foreign money to extract it, causing the nation's currency to soar. Stage 3, this new, strong currency makes everything else the country produces, manufacturing, agriculture, services, too expensive for the rest of the world to buy. Those sectors collapse. This is the Dutch disease. Stage 4. The government, now flush with cash, abandons sound policy for massive spending, debt, and rampant corruption. Stage 5. The nation becomes completely dependent on the price of that one single commodity. Stage 6. The resource price, which is always volatile, inevitably crashes. Stage 7. Total economic and social collapse. Every single time, the people in power believed they were different. That this time, the wealth would be managed. That the old rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong. And right now, in 2025, the world's newest oil superpower, the tiny nation of Guyana, is following that exact same pattern, step by step, warning sign by warning sign. This is the story of how wealth destroys nations. How it happened to the Netherlands, how it hollowed out Venezuela, and why every sign says it's happening again. Let's start with the country that literally gave the curse its name, the Netherlands. In 1959, the Dutch discovered the Groningen gas field, one of the largest natural gas fields ever found. For the Netherlands, it was like winning the lottery. Money poured into the small country. The Dutch guilder became one of the most powerful and stable currencies on earth. But this strength was a poison. This is stage 3. Dutch disease. Because the guilder was so valuable, Dutch-made products, Philips electronics, textiles, ships, chemicals became incredibly expensive for the rest of the world to buy. At the same time, foreign goods became dirt cheap for the Dutch to import. The result was a catastrophe. The nation's manufacturing sector collapsed. Why buy a Dutch-made shirt when an imported one was half the price? Factories shut down. Workers were laid off by the hundreds of thousands. This is the paradox. The country was richer than ever on paper, but its real productive economy was dying. This triggered stage 4. The government, rich on gas money, expanded the welfare state massively to pay for all the new unemployment. The entire nation became dependent on gas exports to pay its bills. Why innovate? Why build a factory? Why compete when the government could just mail you a check funded by the gas bubbling from the ground? The Netherlands was left with a hollowed-out industrial base and a welfare state it could not afford. The country eventually recovered by forcing painful, brutal economic reforms. But they were the first to prove the pattern. A sudden flood of resource wealth doesn't add to your economy. It replaces it. And what it leaves behind is a hollow shell. The pattern was set. And just a few years later, it would repeat itself with far more tragic consequences. Now we come to Venezuela. Today we see Venezuela as a failed state. But in the 1970s, it was the envy of the world. It was the richest country in Latin America, and one of the wealthiest on earth. Caracas was a shining modern metropolis filled with art, highways, and skyscrapers. And it was all built on oil. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. And it followed the pattern to destruction. Stage 1 and 2. Massive discovery, massive wealth. By the 1950s, oil money flooded the country. The currency, the bolivar, was so strong that Venezuela was known as a playground for the rich. Stage 3. Dutch disease. Just like in the Netherlands, the strong currency killed everything else. Venezuela used to be a major exporter of coffee, cattle, and food. But the bolivar was so strong, it became cheaper to import food from Miami than to grow it in the Venezuelan countryside. So the farms died. The factories died. The entire nation's economy re-engineered itself to do only one thing: pump oil. By the 1980s, 90% of its export earnings came from oil. Stage 4 and 5, government spending and dependence. The government became the sole distributor of this immense wealth. It borrowed billions against future oil sales, funding massive social programs and infrastructure projects. But this fire hose of cash also fueled legendary corruption. The state wasn't a government, it was a piggy bank. The entire population, from the rich elites to the poor in the barrios, became addicted to the government's oil check. Then, stage 6. The price crash. Oil prices are volatile. When they crashed in the 1980s and again in the 2010s, Venezuela was naked. It had nothing else to sell to the world. No farms, no factories. No other source of income. The government, desperate to keep the promises it made, did the only thing it could. It printed money. This led to stage 7, collapse, hyperinflation. The currency became worthless. A nation with more oil than anyone on earth saw its people starving, its hospitals without medicine, and its society disintegrating. The curse wasn't the lack of wealth. The curse was the wealth. Which brings us to now. Until 2015, Guyana was one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Its main exports were sugar, rice, and bauxite. Most of its educated citizens had left. Then ExxonMobil discovered oil. Not just some oil. One of the largest offshore finds in modern history. The reserves are so vast, over 11 billion barrels and counting, that by 2030, this tiny nation of 800,000 people will be producing more oil per capita than Kuwait, more than Saudi Arabia. It is literally the fastest growing economy on earth. The government is promising a utopia. The oil money, they say, will build new roads, new schools, new hospitals, and provide a basic income for every citizen. But the pattern is already beginning. The warning signs for stage 3 are flashing red. The IMF is already warning that Guyana's economy is overheating. The flood of oil money is causing inflation. And the traditional sectors, the real economy, are in danger. Farmers are already complaining they can't find workers. Why pick rice when you can get a higher-paying, low-skilled job in the oil services sector? It is cheaper to import food than to grow it. This is the Dutch disease. This is exactly how it started in Venezuela. And stage 4 is right behind it. The government has created a sovereign wealth fund to manage the money, claiming it has learned from its neighbors' mistakes. But critics warn the rules for withdrawing money are too weak. The oversight is lacking, and the potential for corruption is massive. The government has already tripled its national budget, spending money on massive infrastructure projects long before the fund is stable. The trap is set. The economy is, day by day, becoming totally dependent on the price of oil. So let's identify the pattern one last time, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Stage 1. Massive discovery. The Netherlands' Groningen field. Venezuela's oil reserves. Guyana's offshore boom. Stage 2. Sudden wealth influx. It happened to all three. Stage 3. Dutch disease. It crippled Dutch manufacturing. It destroyed Venezuelan agriculture. And it is starting in Guyana right now. Stage 4. Government overspending and corruption. It bloated the Dutch welfare state. It turned the Venezuelan government into a corrupt piggy bank. And the warnings for Guyana are deafening. Stage 5. Total dependence. Stage 6. Price crash. Stage 7. Collapse. Guyana's leaders say they are different. They say they have learned from Venezuela. But the Dutch leaders said that. The Venezuelan leaders, in their time, also believed they were building a paradise. They all believe the old rules don't apply to them. But the pattern is absolute. The math doesn't care about good intentions. It doesn't care about political promises. The resource curse is economic gravity. You cannot build a diverse, sustainable economy on a foundation of easy money. The Dutch gas fields are nearly empty, their manufacturing sector a shadow of its former self. Venezuela's oil became a poison that destroyed its society. And now Guyana, the richest new nation on earth, is standing at stage 3 of the most predictable economic tragedy in modern history. The only question is not if the pattern will hold, but how long Guyana has until stage 6 arrives. How long until the greatest blessing in their history reveals itself as the curse it has always been. If this gave you a new perspective on wealth, subscribe. Because when the pattern completes, you'll want to understand why. History has the answers. And the pattern never lies.